Shade, Katrina, and Lyra moved through the ruins with silent precision, their every step measured against the crumbling landscape. The fortress loomed in the distance, its towering spires casting jagged shadows across the desolate land. Faint torchlight flickered along the high walls, illuminating patrols that moved in practiced patterns. Draven's forces were active, too active for mere defense. He was preparing for something bigger. Lyra led them along a narrow, forgotten pathway concealed beneath broken archways and collapsed structures. "There's an old access route ahead," she murmured. "I used to use it when I worked for him. It's how we smuggled in supplies and other things." Katrina gave her a sharp look but said nothing, keeping her focus on their approach. Shade, ever watchful, scanned the upper ledges for signs of watchers, his grip firm on his greatsword. As they reached a vantage point overlooking the inner courtyard, they crouched low behind the remnants of a shattered wall. Below, the fortress was alive with movement, rows of soldiers in disciplined formations trained under the harsh bark of their commanders. Weaponsmiths hammered out new armor and swords, their forges glowing hot in the night. Stacks of enchanted weapons and armor were being inspected by robed figures, magical enforcers ensuring each piece was imbued with lethal efficiency. "This isn't just security," Katrina whispered. "This is an army." Shade's eyes narrowed. Draven's been building for war. The question is, against who? Hidden in the ruins overlooking the fortress, Shade, Katrina, and Lyra remained shrouded in the deep shadows, observing the unfolding confrontation below. The night air carried the sharp edge of tension as Ravina stormed into the courtyard, her presence demanding immediate attention. Draven's guards moved to intercept her, but she barely slowed, her hands moving with deadly precision. A flick of her wrist, a graceful step, and the first man crumpled, a dagger buried in his throat. The second she dispatched with a brutal efficiency, her movements as fluid as they were merciless. By the time she reached the center of the courtyard, bodies lay in her wake, staining the stone crimson. Draven emerged from the shadows of his keep, his ornate cloak billowing as he approached her with a controlled yet wary stride. Even from their vantage point, it was clear that Ravina was livid. "You said you would get it back," she hissed, voice sharp as a blade. "Instead, you've allowed a petty little thief to outplay you. A goblin! You expect me to believe you can handle Earth's defenses when you can't even deal with a single insignificant thief." Draven's jaw tightened, his fingers twitching at his side. "I had it under control," Ravina scoffed, stepping dangerously close. "If you had it under control, I wouldn't be here." The tension broke in an instant. Draven's hand shot to his weapon, the steel ringing out as he leveled his sword at Ravina's throat. For a split second, the world held its breath. Then, Ravina moved. Faster than even Draven could react, she closed the gap between them, twisting his wrist painfully as she forced him onto his knees. His sword clattered to the ground. She leaned down, her voice dripping with venom. "You have one last chance," she murmured. "One. And I will be the one watching this time." She pushed him back with effortless strength before turning on her heel. "I'll take care of it myself." Up in the ruins, Lyra smirked, her arms loosely crossed over her chest. "Well, well," she mused, her tone amused, but calculating. "A goblin thief. That certainly explains a lot." She glanced sideways, noting the subtle shifts in Shade and Katrina's expressions. Shade was unreadable as always, but Katrina's posture had tightened ever so slightly. Lyra's smirk grew sharper. "You two wouldn't happen to know anything about a petty little goblin thief, would you?" Katrina's grip on her katana flexed, but Shade spoke first, his voice calm, but carrying a weight beneath it. "We need to move." Lyra tilted her head, clearly intrigued, but let it go, for now. The three of them faded into the night, knowing they needed to get this intel back to Echo Division. And knowing that the war they'd been preparing for had just taken a very dangerous turn. Shade, Katrina and Lyra moved swiftly through the ruins, keeping to the deepest shadows as they made their way back toward Eldermire. The night had deepened, the mist growing thicker, swirling in ghostly tendrils around broken pillars and half-collapsed structures. Katrina remained on edge, her mind turning over what they had just overheard. Draven had been using the celestial gem to access Nythoria, and if Ravina was now stepping in to handle things personally, the danger had escalated far beyond what they had expected. Shade walked slightly ahead, his movements effortless despite the rough terrain. He was always quiet, always calculating, but even he seemed to be processing the implications of what they had learned. Lyra, on the other hand, strolled behind them, her gait light, almost lazy, though her eyes missed nothing. She was watching them, waiting for the right moment to probe further. "You two are tense," she finally said, voice smooth as silk. "This goblin thief of yours. She must be quite the thorn in Draven's side." Katrina didn't answer, her fingers tightening slightly around her blade hilt. Shade's voice was cool, neutral. "We weren't sent here to get involved. We were here to gather information." Lyra chuckled. "And yet, here we are." They reached the outskirts of the ruins, the remnants of Eldermire's once mighty portal facility, now little more than scattered stone and faded enchantments. The arcane lines that once pulsed with raw energy were now fractured, unstable, flickering with erratic bursts of residual magic. Katrina frowned as she scanned the area, her instincts telling her something was off. "The magic here isn't dead, but it's broken," she murmured. Shade reached up, pressing his hand to his talisman in an attempt to contact the team. Static. "Still blocked?" he muttered. Lyra crouched near one of the shattered runes, tracing a gloved finger over the scorched stone. "This portal's been used recently," she observed, her tone shifting to something more serious. "Someone forced it open." Katrina exchanged a glance with Shade. If Draven was still using portals in Murkdusk, then how? The celestial gem was on Earth. That meant there had to be another way. Shade exhaled, scanning the remnants of the portal ring. "We need to find a way to reopen this." Lyra stood, crossing her arms. "Lucky for you, I happen to be good at getting into places I'm not supposed to." Katrina shot her a look. "You're volunteering to help?" Lyra smirked. "Oh, I never volunteer. But if Draven and Ravina are involved, this just became my problem too." Shade looked between them, then back at the ruined portal. They had no choice but to make this work. Echo Division needed this intel, and they needed to get home, fast. The ruins of Eldermire stood in eerie silence, the weight of its long-forgotten past pressing down on the broken stones. Shade, Katrina and Lyra stood at the fractured remains of the portal ring, staring at the lingering remnants of unstable magic. "This is it," Katrina said quietly, her eyes scanning the faint flickers of arcane energy still pulsing along the carved stone. "The same place Argos used to escape." Shade knelt beside the portal's fractured centerpiece, brushing his fingers against the sigils carved into the foundation. The runes were ancient, but they still held whispers of power, fractured and unstable, but present. Lyra tilted her head, crossing her arms. "Well, would you look at that? A dying ember still holding on? I wonder why." Shade studied the energy patterns before answering. "Portals don't just fade at random. If this one is still flickering after all these months, then something is keeping it tethered." Katrina's gaze narrowed. "Or someone." Lyra let out a low chuckle. "You're thinking Draven still has a way through?" Shade exhaled sharply. "I think he's trying to force one." Katrina ran a hand over the rough stone, her instincts prickling. This might be how he's still sending people through to Earth. Lyra arched a brow. "Clever little rat, using a broken portal like a back door." Shade stood, his sharp gaze fixed on the ruins around them. "Then, we're not the only ones who might be trying to use it." For a long moment, none of them spoke. The ruins groaned under the weight of the wind, and the portal's flickering glow pulsed weakly, like a dying heartbeat. Katrina frowned as she studied the swirling energy, its surface shifting between stability and chaos. We need to assess the stability of this portal before we just... Lyra was already moving. Or we could just go through it and stop overthinking. Her tone was infuriatingly casual as she stepped toward the portal, golden hair catching the eerie glow of its energy. Shade's grip on his sword tightened. That's not how we do things. Lyra barely spared him a glance. Maybe that's why you two take so long to get things done. Katrina's glare sharpened. You reckless! Too late. Without another word, Lyra stepped through the unstable portal, as if daring them to be left behind. The swirling light swallowed her whole. Katrina let out a string of curses, her hands clenching into fists. I am going to kill her. Shade exhaled through his nose. Later. Move. With no other choice, they followed. The portal pulsed, flickering like a dying ember before snapping shut behind them. Shade, Katrina, and their unexpected guest landed in the cool night air of the Michigan shoreline, the sand damp beneath their boots. The rhythmic crashing of waves on Lake Michigan's shore filled the silence as the trio adjusted to the shift between realms. Katrina inhaled deeply, scanning the surrounding trees. The lake stretched behind them, its dark surface shimmering under the full moon. But something about the crisp air felt different, cleaner, steadier. A stark contrast to the charged energy of murk dusk. But what set her on edge wasn't the shift in environment. It was the presence standing too close for comfort. Lyra stood beside them, arms crossed, looking entirely too relaxed. A ghost of amusement danced in her piercing blue eyes, as if stepping through a portal to an unknown world was just another night for her. Shade barely spared her a glance before touching the enchanted talisman at his neck, activating their link to the workshop. Shade to Echo. We're through. And we've got company. The response wasn't immediate, but after a few seconds, Eli's voice crackled through, slightly distorted but unmistakably sharp. What kind of company? Shade's gaze drifted to Lyra, who caught his look and smirked. The unexpected kind. There was a pause, then Eli's voice returned, less questioning and more resigned. Yeah. I'm sending Gunnar and Darren now. Sit tight. Lyra stretched her arms, rolling her shoulders with a satisfied sigh. Well, isn't this cozy? I have to admit, I didn't expect such a warm welcome. Katrina ignored her, focusing instead on the distant rumble of approaching engine. Headlights cut through the trees, bouncing over the uneven road as a black SUV rolled toward them. The vehicle slowed as they neared, tires crunching on gravel before coming to a stop. The front passenger door opened with controlled precision, and Gunnar stepped out first. He took in the trio with a sweep of his sharp, calculating gaze, his single blue eye narrowing as it locked onto Lyra. His presence was a wall of authority, unspoken yet undeniable. The driver's door swung open more casually. Darren stepped out, rolling his shoulders as he took in the scene. His dark eyes landed on Lyra, raking over her with a slow, assessing glance before a grin spread across his face. Well, well. If I knew you two were bringing home souvenirs, I'd have told Eli to set up a guest room. Lyra didn't miss a beat. She stepped forward, tilting her head as she appraised Darren in turn, her grin playful yet predatory. Oh, sweetheart, you don't even have to ask. Darren smirked, clearly entertained. Damn, I think I like her already. Gunnar didn't share his amusement. You like bad decisions. Darren shrugged. Exactly. Lyra placed a hand on her hip, flipping a golden strand of hair over her shoulder. I do have that effect on men. Katrina, unamused, cut in. She was tracking us before we even reached Draven's fortress. She claims she's got intel, but we didn't exactly invite her. Lyra turned toward Katrina, her expression unreadable. And yet, here I am. Shade finally spoke, his voice as steady as ever. She also knew Draven was accessing Nythoria. She's more than just a tag-along. Gunnar's gaze darkened slightly at that. He studied Lyra in silence for a moment, as if weighing the truth behind Shade's words. "You got intel?" he finally said. "Start talking, or we turn you right back around." Lyra feigned a wounded look. "And here, I thought I'd at least get a drink first." Darren was already opening the SUV door. "I like her. Can we keep her?" Gunnar exhaled sharply through his nose. "Get in the damn truck!" Lyra's laugh was soft, but victorious. She strode past them with an effortless sway, sliding into the passenger seat like she belonged there. Darren followed, still grinning, and looked at Gunnar as he climbed in after her. "This is going to be fun." Katrina exchanged a look with Shade before they too loaded into the SUV. The engines rumbled to life, tires kicking up dust as they turned and headed back toward the workshop, toward whatever new chaos awaited them. The dark Michigan road stretched ahead, the headlights of the SUV cutting through the night. The only sound inside the vehicle was the steady hum of tires against asphalt, the distant call of nocturnal wildlife beyond the glass. Even within the confined space of the SUV, the air was thick with tension. Shade sat in silence, arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the window, eyes scanning the passing scenery, but his mind was far from the winding roads of Michigan. He was still processing everything they had just seen in murk dusk, the ruins, the fortress, the army preparing for war. It wasn't just the sight of Draven's forces that unsettled him, but the implications. War was coming, whether Echo Division was ready for it or not. Katrina mirrored his stillness. Her posture was rigid, fingers still curled tightly around the hilt of her blade, as if she expected another fight to break out at any moment. Every muscle in her body remained coiled, ready for violence. But there was something else lingering beneath her quiet demeanor. Something darker. The mention of the celestial gem, the realization that Draven had been slipping in and out of Nythoria. It all left a bitter taste in her mouth. And then there was Lyra. She sat in the back like she owned the damn vehicle, arms draped lazily over the headrest, legs crossed as if they weren't returning to a base where at least half the people inside would want her dead on sight. There was an infuriating ease about her, the kind that only came with knowing you were 2 steps ahead of everyone in the room, or at least thinking you were. She smirked. "So, how long until we get to your little fortress?" No one answered. Lyra sighed dramatically. "Fine, silent treatment, real mature." She let her head tip back against the seat, the picture of relaxed confidence. "You know, for a bunch of hardened operatives, you two sulk like amateurs." Shade didn't react. Katrina shot her a look that could kill. Darren, however, took the bait. "Oh, I like her," he muttered to Gunnar, grinning as he leaned back in his seat. "Haven't even been here an hour, and she's already pissing off the Ice Queen and the Shadow Man." Katrina's knuckles audibly cracked. Lyra just winked at Darren, utterly unfazed. "Oh, you're fun. I do enjoy a man who appreciates my finer qualities." Darren raised a brow, smirking. "And what finer qualities would those be?" Lyra gave a slow, deliberately sultry smile. "Wouldn't you like to find out?" Before Darren could respond, the vehicle screeched to an abrupt halt. Everyone lurched forward as Gunnar slammed on the brakes. The silence that followed was suffocating. Gunnar's knuckles were tight on the steering wheel, his posture unreadable, but the raw authority in his voice left no room for argument. "Enough!" he growled. Lyra, unbothered, adjusted her seatbelt with a smirk. "Touchy." Darren let out a slow whistle. "Wow. You managed to get a reaction out of him. That doesn't happen much." The security gates loomed ahead, towering and reinforced, their metal frames glowing softly under the perimeter floodlights. As the SUVs rolled forward, the red lights atop the gate sensors turned green, granting them access. The steel doors hissed as they slid open, revealing the well-guarded entrance to Echo Division's hidden stronghold. The convoy moved inside. The moment the vehicles came to a stop, Katrina was the first out, slamming the door behind her. She wasn't waiting for anyone. Shade followed, ever the watchful sentinel, keeping an eye on Lyra, who, unsurprisingly, took her sweet time exiting. stretching like she'd just woken up from a pleasant nap. Darren leaned casually against the SUV as Gunnar stepped forward, exuding the kind of authority that made it clear he was in no mood for games. "You two, war room? Now." His voice left no room for argument as he addressed Shade and Katrina. His gaze then landed on Lyra. "And you? Stay where I can see you." Lyra feigned offense, placing a hand over her heart. "What, no grand tour? I'm starting to think you don't trust me." "You'd be correct," Gunnar deadpanned. Lyra grinned, flashing a perfect set of white teeth. "Smart man." In the war room, Gunnar stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, eyes scanning the faces before him. Shade, Katrina, Lyra, Eli, and Darren. The rest of the team was still asleep. For now. "Talk," Gunnar ordered, his voice sharp. "What the hell did you find?" Shade leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "Draven's fortress is more than just a stronghold. It's a war machine. He has men, a lot of them. Training grounds, weapon forges, supplies stacked for months. He's not planning a small skirmish. He's preparing for full-scale war." Eli's fingers tapped against the table, eyes sharp. "War against who?" "Us." Katrina shook her head. "It's bigger than that. He's gathering power, and Ravina was there." Gunnar's expression darkened. "Ravina." Lyra, who had been lounging in her chair with an infuriating smirk, finally spoke. "Oh yeah, and she wasn't happy. She tore through his guards like they were paper and had Draven on his knees. If he wasn't already scared of her, he is now." Eli's brows furrowed. "Why would she turn on him? I thought they were working together." Shade exhaled slowly. "Because he failed. He lost something valuable. Something she's coming to Earth to retrieve herself." Gunnar's eyes narrowed. "What?" Katrina met his gaze, voice steady. "The celestial gem." The temperature in the room dropped. Eli's expression shifted immediately, eyes darting toward Gunnar, and they both had the same realization at the exact same time. "Argos." Darren ran a hand down his face. "Oh, son of a bitch." Katrina continued, her voice cold. "Ravina said she was done waiting. She's coming here, to take it back." Silence. Gunnar's jaw tightened. That meant Argos was still being hunted. Shade and Katrina had already pieced it together too. Shade exhaled, glancing toward Eli. "Argos told us she stole a gem from Draven before she fled through the unstable portal. If it's the same gem Ravina was talking about," Eli finished for him, "then Argos didn't just steal treasure. She stole Draven's only key to Nythoria." Lyra's smirk faded slightly. "Wait, a goblin stole the key to Nythoria? Oh, that's just fantastic." Darren let out a dry laugh. "Yeah, welcome to our world." Gunnar didn't say a word for a long moment. His mind was already calculating next steps, locking the pieces into place. Draven wanted the key back. Ravina was done waiting, and Argos, whether she realized it or not, was the only thing standing between them and another open gateway to Nythoria. This just became even bigger than he'd anticipated. Finally, Gunnar looked at Shade and Katrina. "You did good. Get some rest. We'll debrief the entire team at 0800. Katrina nodded once. Shade did the same. Then Gunnar's attention locked onto Lyra. She met his gaze with a slow, knowing smirk. "What? No congratulations for me?" "You're not wandering around my base," Gunnar said flatly. "You'll be in a guest room, locked." Lyra's smirk widened. "Oh? A private room? I didn't realize you were so eager to keep me close." Gunnar didn't rise to the bait. "It's not personal. It's practical." Darren grinned. "Oh, it's personal. You're a walking security risk, and I like my security risks where I can keep an eye on them." Lyra's expression remained amused, but there was an edge behind her eyes as she stretched lazily in her seat. "Fine. Lock me up. But I expect breakfast in the morning. I do prefer my eggs over easy." Gunnar turned to Eli. Make sure we have eyes on her room. Lock it down. Eli nodded, already pulling up security settings on her tablet. Gunnar exhaled. All right. Everyone get some damn sleep while you can. As the group began to disperse, Lyra stayed where she was for a fraction longer, her gaze flickering to Gunnar. For the first time since arriving, her smirk faltered. Just slightly. She had underestimated him. And for the first time in a long time. She wasn't sure if that excited her or pissed her off more.